The U.S. and Israel have taken direct action against Iran, and it's raising more questions than answers. What actually prompted the strike, and why did it happen right now? We've been told that Iran is dangerously close to nuclear capability, but how much of that actually holds up? Is this tied to the momentum of the Abraham Accords or something deeper behind the scenes? And as tensions escalate, could this be setting the stage for the alliances described in Ezekiel 38 and 39? Today's guest is here to help us navigate all of this right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Life TV Now, where we unpack all matters of truth, faith, and freedom. I'm your host, Joe Artis-Horn. Today, we're going to be navigating something with our good friend, Derek Gilbert. Also here today in-house is my beautiful wife, Catherine. Derek, we say every week that we unpack all matters of truth, faith, and freedom. And while there's a lot of content on this program having to do with parasite detoxes, liver cleanses, we also talk about the family construct, the nuclear family. We talk about politics and political unfoldings when we feel like they infringe on truth, faith, and freedom, because we are Americans also, and we live in the United States. And what is happening geopolitically, we are totally ignorant to think that it does not affect our way of life, laws that are being developed, war policies that are unfolding, and something to me that is happening in the church that is marching us, racing us towards the rise of the Antichrist system, is this duality in the also rise of anti-Semitism. And you see these strikes between the United States and Israel against Iran. You see proxy wars developing. You see new alliances being forged. You mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we did programs over with our good friends at Skywatch TV that Israel is now enjoying the benefit of maybe new friendships from countries in the region that have historically been maybe either agnostic or more neutral or even hostile towards them. So, you know, one could speculate they're seeing the power displayed from the U.S. military, and they've decided they've got new friends because they don't want any part whatsoever of being clumped in with Iran or state sponsors of terror. But I just want to say at the onset, if you're wondering who is Derek Gilbert, maybe you're brand new to Life TV Now and you don't know that he's a veteran of Skywatch Television, where we've been analyzing the news for over a decade. Derek is, without a doubt, in my appraisal, and I'm happy to go on the record as having said this, one of two men that I go to when I want true life biblical analysis of what is happening in the Middle East in particular, because he is constantly studying both the Word of God, Bible prophecy, the days that we're living in, and also, and I mean this affectionately, kind of a book nerd when it comes to the news in the Middle East. And I say that with all the affection in the world. The other one is Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. Between the two of you, and we cannot forget your wonderful wife, Sharon Gilbert, who's in the audience today, who you said in a recent episode of Skywatch Television, you know, often when you were covering the news or, you know, analyzing policy in the Middle East, et cetera, it's Sharon that's up before you brewing the coffee saying, hey, did you see this headline? Right? So, you know, I know because I'm married to another good one. You know, men, a lot of times, they'll get the credit for what the women have come up with. Right? So let's start with why, in your view, did the United States partner with Israel to attack Iran? And then I've got to get to the rise of anti-Semitism and the condition of the church. People from the pulpits now, again, does this sound familiar? Doing the work of the Lord to call for the destruction of the Jewish people. Where have you heard that before?
It's something that we saw beginning with October 7th of 2023, when Hamas, which is an Iran proxy, came across the border of Gaza, killed 1,200 Israelis, some of them Arabs, kidnapped another 250 and held many of them until just recently. Some of the Israelis who were recently released in captivity for more than a year in conditions that I think would have to go back to World War II or even the Vietnam War and some of the conditions faced by prisoners of war. When Israel responded in a way that I think the United States would have responded if, for example, a Mexican drug cartel had stormed across the border into El Paso and killed
Right.
1,200 Americans and kidnapped another 250 Americans.
Right.
Wow.
I think President Trump or even President Biden would have unleashed a fury on that cartel that the likes of which they would not have imagined.
Right.
And the world wouldn't have said anything about it. But because it's Israel and
Yep.
it's the Jews, suddenly they're committing genocide. And suddenly we're seeing the rise of a segment of the church, Christians, who believe that Israel is somehow the villain in this story. And this goes back to medieval tropes about the Jews, the perfidious Jew. And it is astonishing because until October 7th of 2023, I would not have imagined a conceivable scenario that would lead the world to go to war against Israel, which is what we see prophesied in Ezekiel 38 and 39, in Zechariah 12, and in other apocalyptic prophecies in the Old Testament. The world will go to war against Israel. And at some point, some scenario like what we're seeing now, because you can see the sentiment rising around the world,
Yeah.
not just here in the United States, but our European allies, of course, Russia, China, and of course, many of the Muslim nations. Until the Iran war broke out and Iran started flinging missiles at Muslim nations in the Gulf region, condemning Israel for responding and say, look what you've done to Gaza. You've destroyed Gaza. Well, yeah, Hamas could have laid down its arms at some point and said, we surrendered. There's no point in continuing this fight because we're not going to win. But they didn't.
Yeah.
Continue to hide behind its own citizens because they know world sentiment builds against Israel the longer the conflict goes on. So finally, we're seeing a scenario in which a dynamic, charismatic, handsome, or pretty, but I presume the Antichrist will be a man, convinces the world that, hey, look, we told Israel to stop. Israel will not stop. So let's make them stop.
Right.
This is where we are right now. The Iran war, I think, is a separate issue to a degree in that despite the negotiations that President Trump was holding through his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the Iranians, according to Steve Witkoff, told them during their first session, yeah, we've got enough enriched uranium to make 11 nuclear weapons. But you were telling us that this was all for, domestic power generation.
Right.
Yeah.
The thing that most Americans don't understand, most Christians don't really comprehend, and it's really our fault because there are 1,400 years of history from which to draw this lesson. The innovation that the Ayatollah Khomeini, who led the Islamic Revolution in 1979, brought to Shia Islam was that prior to Ayatollah Khomeini, Shia Muslims believed that they were not supposed to wage jihad until the Mahdi, their version of the Messiah, returned. They are waiting for the 12th Imam who is in occultation, meaning he's supernaturally hidden somewhere like, King Arthur on the island of Avalon, waiting to return until he comes back and then they can wage jihad. Ayatollah Khomeini said, no, the world is full of chaos. In order to prevent the chaos from overwhelming us, we must take control of all the Muslim nations and then the rest of the world. So essentially you've got and I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but Islam at its fundamentalist interpretation, the way it was taught by Muhammad, is a death.
Yeah, it is.
It is. And to allow a death cult that believes it has a holy calling to take over the world, to get its hands on nuclear weapons, would be suicide. Benjamin Netanyahu has been warning the world about this for 40 years.
Right.
President Trump understands this. He's been saying for years that Iran cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Tried to negotiate, offered them a deal.
Right,
He's a
right.
businessman.
Right.
They wouldn't take the deal. And so this is the or else.
That's right, and I want to say I agree with you in all of that. I believe, and I don't really want to dwell today on too much of the political ramifications of this because I want to talk more about the lasting spiritual implications. That's what this program exists to do. But I want to say, for the heat that Donald Trump is taking right now, well, he said he wasn't going to do wars, and what did he do? He got us into wars. His stated position was that he doesn't like war. Right. He doesn't want to start new ones, but this was a threat that has existed, as you've asserted, for decades.
Oh, yeah.
And Iran would not pay attention to numerous people basically asserting the or else.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't know if you agree with this, but feeling a little bit forced, like this was a necessary move to prevent one of the largest sponsors of terror in the world from getting their hands on nuclear weapons when they've been telling us for decades, death to America.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. The death of 241 United States Marines in 1982 at the barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. And, Ronald Reagan, one of the greatest conservative presidents we had in American history, rather than because it was Hezbollah, Iran working through Hezbollah that committed that bombing, instead of the find out portion of that responding to it, President Reagan's response, under the influence of his advisors, no, it would embroil the Middle East in a wider conflict, decided to withdraw from the Middle East. And so for 47 years, the United States has adopted that policy where you've got policy advisors and philosophers and thinkers saying, no, we can't get involved in this because it'll lead to instability in the Middle East. We can't do this.
Right.
I'm sorry, but in that part of the world, and setting Islam aside, in that part of the world, strength is what is understood. If somebody hits you, you have to hit them back harder.
Yeah.
This is not how we in the West are raised to believe. We try to negotiate, talk things out, solve things peacefully, but that's projecting our values and our beliefs and our worldview onto that part of the world. We saw how well that worked. We tried to impose a Western-style democracy on Afghanistan or Iraq, which are tribal. In fact, that whole region is tribal.
Exactly.
Allegiances in that part of the world among Arabs, Afghans, is to your family first, your clan second, your tribe third. The idea of the nation state is a Western concept.
It is,
That really doesn't mean anything in that part of the world. So we are foolish to believe when we go into a negotiation with people from that part of the world, if we don't negotiate like President Trump has done, look, we'll offer you a deal. If you don't take the deal, here's what's going to happen. And he warned them.
Yeah.
But I think after 47 years, here's my red line.
Saber rattling.
And then they cross the red line. It's like, all right, we'll draw a new red line over here.
Right.
They assumed that there would be no find out portion. And this is where we're at. I understand why President Trump's supporters are upset. And I am a President Trump supporter. But I think after, the reading I've done on Islamic history and the violence committed in the name of Allah for 1,400 years, as we talked about on Skywatch TV, the reason the West is called the West is not just geographic, it's because that's what was left of Christendom after the armies of Islam conquered most of Christendom in the 7th and 8th centuries. I mean, by that point, Spain had been conquered, all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, half of Turkey, all of Persia, most of Afghanistan, part of India. That's all that was left. Nations that we think of as always having been Muslim had been Christian for centuries. Egypt, North Africa, Libya, Morocco, Spain. And that's fundamentalist Islam, and that is what the Ayatollahs had imposed in 1979 on the people of Iran.
How many of you have seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson? If you haven't seen it, for context, there's a scene where he's in, I believe, a church gathered with his constituents, and there are those locally where they live talking about the risk of agitating their enemies.
Right.
And so we want to wash our hands. We got to stay out of this. And there's a scene where Mel Gibson accurately says, our children are going to learn of this in our own backyards. They are upon us. We have no choice. We have to push back. And obviously this is a dramatized film that portrays, people's interpretations of what was happening in Civil War times. But the point is, I think there's a level of being sheltered that allows Americans to drive through their coffee places and be angry about things. But I still weep when I think about some of the photographs that I've seen of Hamas militia carrying 16-year-old girls over their shoulders. I won't describe the scene any further than that. It is one of those that stays with you. They're touting these young girls as trophies. When you have seen things in your own backyard, and this isn't just something you see on the news or some other part of the world, it's the Middle East, somebody's always burning something. When this affects you, suddenly your political ideologies shift very fast. And what you would be capable of, what you think is acceptable, the response that you're demanding.
Yeah.
And I remember my father, who, again, for context, if you're new to Life TV now, multiple, like Derek and Sharon both, multiple-time best-selling authors that have been on top of Christian media for more than 2 decades. Derek's career is over 45 years now in broadcast radio and television. I remember my father saying, Israel deals with this terror
Yes.
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here in the West, we are naive.
Absolutely.
This thought that we're kind of immune to a sudden EMP or maybe a surprise blast or a dirty nuke going off in a New York. Remember after 9/11 how fast the nation was sobered. And what did they do? They prayed.
Yep.
But then it's been a while, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that people in the West, in my view, are very naive to the threat that not only we face, but they're not living out every day in their comfortable lives the threat that Israel lives under.
No, exactly. Sharon and I led a small group to Israel in the spring of 2024. So this was like 6 months into the war with Hamas in Gaza. And we took a trip down to the Gaza envelope, which is what they call in Israel, the border communities along the Gaza fence. We visited the city of Sderot, where the police station had been overrun by Hamas terrorists. We looked into Gaza from an overlook, a hill, where we could see the border fence just half a mile away. We could hear the IDF artillery in the distance. They were beginning the operation to take the border crossing at Rafah. And we could hear boom, boom, and our guide saying, "Don't worry, it's the good guys." But then they took us to a playground. And we saw this playground with this brightly colored, looked like a 50-foot long caterpillar, painted green, a big smile on the caterpillar's face, and little doors where the kids can run in and out of the caterpillar. And then you notice little pockmarks on the front of the caterpillar where a Hamas rocket had landed nearby and shrapnel had hit the front of this caterpillar. And then you look closer and you realize that the caterpillar is made from 6-inch thick reinforced concrete because it's a shelter from rocket attacks. And the children of Sderot had been raised to know that when the siren goes off, they have 15 seconds to get inside the caterpillar or the little tree painted like a Smurf tree. Would we raise our children that way?
Right.
They
Exactly.
have lived with this since Hamas brutally murdered the operatives from their rival political party, Fatah, which controls the West Bank, or what the world calls the West Bank. Excuse me to my Israeli friends. I mean Judea and Samaria. This is how Israel has lived since 1948.
That's right.
I did an interview with a fellow that we have become friends with. He's a writer for Israel 365 News, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz. He lives in the city of Katzrin, which is in the north on the Golan Heights. Did an interview with him during the early days of the war. And of course, Hezbollah had weighed in the war early on after Hamas attack and talked with him about what it was like. He goes to the grocery store. The alarm goes off. They have to go to the mobile bomb shelter sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store. We conclude the interview saying, "Thank you for your time and hope we can see you again soon." Suddenly the alarm goes off. Right at the end of the interview, he says, "Gotta go." And he rushes off camera. They've got bomb shelters in their homes. New construction homes in Israel are built with bomb shelters inside. Again, we Americans have no clue as to what this is about. And yet, when war breaks out, the Israelis who've been under rocket fire from the north, from Hezbollah, from Hamas in Gaza, Israel is the bad guy. Israel's committing genocide. The war would stop if Hamas or Hezbollah would just lay down their weapons. If Israel laid down its weapons, as former Prime Minister Golda Meir said, there would be no Israel.
That's right.
That's right.
So this is what we in the church need to understand. We have lived sheltered lives because we have not had war on our soil
That's right.
really since 1865. And Israel has dealt with this since 1948. I read a wonderful piece by an Israeli writer just the other day. It was shared by a gentleman who came with us to Israel in 2019. And then the responses from our tour guides, because he shared it with them. And this writer, whose name I forget, he said, in Israel, this isn't resilience, it's just Tuesday.
That's right.
I have seen some sickening things in social media coming from my Christian friends. These are people that have self-identified as Christians. They've been followers of some of our ministerial work over years. And in my view, man, this is how I can gauge how desperately blind even some of the most ardent researchers of Bible prophecy at this point or the ones that the laity that attend the church that at least have conversations about it, right?
Right.
Where they're taking the sides of the mainstream media in calling Israel baby eaters and attacking people like me for standing with Israel.
Right.
You know, and I thought that you were against human trafficking. Didn't you write a book about children? They're baby eaters. They traffic. They're evil.
Name a country on earth where that doesn't happen.
And we're not
Wow.
excusing it at all. But what I've
No,
tried to do is distinguish the difference between corruption that exists in every single government
Yeah.
versus just casting out the entire Jewish people,
Yeah.
or this nonsense about them being descendants from a Turkish line of blood that these aren't even really the people of God, and the people that are standing with Israel don't even understand the Bible themselves.
You know, the irony of that claim is that they're not real Jews. They're
Right.
actually Turkish, and yet they've started this holy war so they can build the third temple and restart the Jewish religious practice in the third. Those sneaky Turks.
Oh my goodness.
Joel Richardson wrote that. I got to get Joel Richardson
yes.
credit for that.
Joel Richardson, he's another really smart guy.
Yes, he is.
With just a few minutes left on the clock, and you guys, hey, we're going to have Derek back next week. Do you feel like this is connected in any way to this scuttlebutt, the whispers, the rising perspective from some that this might have something to do with the Abraham Accords?
Absolutely. In fact, the Israelis found documents in a Hamas tunnel that Yahya Sinwar, the late leader of the on-the-ground operations in Hamas, had written that this was exactly why they did what they did, because back in October of 2023, Saudi Arabia was on the verge of signing on to the Abraham Accords. Now, Saudi Arabia is the most powerful Sunni nation in the world, the most wealthy, and of course, money talks. So Hamas, even though it's a Sunni organization, was backed by the Shia power, because even though Sunnis and Shias hate each other more than they hate Jews or Christians or Hindus or Buddhists, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they were happy to take Iran's money and do their dirty work. But they saw the danger in losing the financial support of all of the Sunni nations, other than perhaps Qatar. So they decided to drive a wedge between Israel and the Sunni nations in the Gulf, like the UAE, like Kuwait, like Bahrain, which is mainly Shia, but ruled by a Sunni royalty. Drive a wedge between them and Israel by starting this war, because once Israel responded, Hamas knew they were going to get clobbered, knew that there would be civilian casualties, but from Hamas's standpoint, that was a feature, not a bug, because then the Sunni nations, the leaders of the Sunni nations that had signed on to the Abraham Accords, in order to appease their people, had to say, oh, well, we got to back away from Israel.
So, Derek, how does the war affect the prophecies from Ezekiel 38 and 39?
Well, Persia is mentioned prominently in there. Ezekiel names coalitions coming from the north, the land, Gog of Magog, with Meshech and Tubal and Beth Togarmah and et cetera, Gomer. From the east, you've got Persia. From the south, there's Cush. From the west is Put, which is Libya. Cush being Ethiopia and Sudan. Of that group, of course, in the north, you've got Turkey. All of those nations from the north are what is now Turkey. Persia, obviously, since 1979, Iran has been an existential threat to Israel. If the regime falls in Iran, how does that change the calculus? I think a lot of prophecy scholars are going to be redoing their charts and graphs. But here's the thing. What Ezekiel was saying in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and this is not just our interpretation, a scholar named Daniel Block, who's written probably the best commentary on the book of Ezekiel, pointed this out. In the 6th century BC, those nations that Ezekiel named were the farthest nations in those four directions, north, east, southwest, that his readers would have ever heard of. For Americans, it's like saying, well, that's like from Timbuktu.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure even where Timbuktu is. But his readers would have known Persia's that way, and
Right.
Togarmah, Beth Togarmah that way. What Ezekiel was saying is that they're coming from the four corners of the earth against Israel, which again aligns with the prophecy in Zechariah 12. Jerusalem will be a cup of staggering or drunkenness for the nations. The nations will come against it in a crazy fashion. like staggering, falling over like a drunken man, making no sense. But they will come against Israel and fight against Israel. And God will fight on behalf of the house of Judah and the house of David.
Yeah.
And in Zechariah 14, when he lands on the Mount of Olives, it splits in two, and he walks through that eastern gate. So I think if we step back and look at this as a supernatural conflict rather than a geopolitical conflict,
That's the one.
the word Sharon coined years ago, theopolitical. It's the whole world that comes against Israel. So I don't think this conflict actually changes Ezekiel 38 and 39 at all.
Derek, we only have about a minute left on the clock. I'm just going to shotgun blast ask you your opinion, because this is probably the question on the lips of everybody still watching this episode. You've talked about it in inference, but yes or no, should Christians be supporting Israel right now?
The government of Israel, like every other government on earth, is run by flawed, failing, sinful men and women.
Sure.
And everybody needs Jesus. Nobody gets a free pass. We understand that. But it's clear in Scripture. Romans 11, God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew. Zechariah 12, Zechariah 14, Book of Amos, other prophecies. Revelation 7, God is not yet finished with the Jews. And in Zechariah 12, when he returns, God said to the prophet Zechariah, they will look on me, on him whom they have pierced, and mourn. So we as Christians, it is our job to share the hope that we have in Christ Jesus. And if we're bashing them over the head with the Bible and saying, you're a Satanist, they won't listen.
That's right.
We need to love them as Christ loved us.
That's right.
We were grafted into that tree. God did not cut down the tree and plant a new one.
That's right.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. We are right in the midst of this, but we are going to have Derek back next week, and he's going to be talking with us about whether or not Zionism influenced the creation of the Jewish homeland. It's not an episode you're going to want to miss. Ladies and gentlemen, for everybody here in studio, Derek, Catherine, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Artis Horn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back. Next week on Live TV Now, to me right now, one of the biggest elephants in the room that Christians are very divided about. It is like a red siren. Dur, dur, dur. If you're a follower of Bible prophecy, if you're one that's been trying to make sense of why the church now is almost co-joining this effort via anti-Semitism to hate the Jewish people, if you're following all of this madness, and you've got questions, this is the place to be today.
The probability is high that we've got IRGC sleeper cells here in the United States.
right.
At the end, the final battle, this is the Old Testament conception of Armageddon, when the whole world comes to war against Jerusalem.
Should Christians be in support of Israel?